All right, so it's Tuesday morning, April 21st, and we are continuing our review of political geography. So if you're keeping track, there are 5 units to the AP exam this year: intro, population, culture, political geography, and agricultural rural land use. So we are on unit 4 then in preparing for this test. So all week long we'll do political geography. All week next week we will do agricultural and rural land use. And that will leave us the last few days to just focus on some basic skills, go back and visit some things that maybe we didn't fully address or we need more explanation for. Okay, so hopefully to do the bell ringer from yesterday, you followed the link to look at the light map for the world, for the United States, and for North Dakota. 3 different scales. A really common theme and a really common element in AP exam questions is to ask students about examining information at different scales. So here are some basic terms that you want to be thinking about. You want to be talking about whether or not something is at a global scale, like for example, the world light map. Or is it at a national scale, the, say, United States? Or is it at a state or regional scale, which would be more like the state of North Dakota? And then we can even talk about things at local scales, like the city of Cincinnati or your own neighborhood. And as we move down in size and show smaller and smaller land areas, we can obviously show less of what's happening across the Earth's surface. So we gain less of an understanding about all of humanity. But on the other side of things, we start to gain more detailed information about each of the regions that we're looking at. So this is where our resolution goes up, our ability to show more accurately information with a single dot. What could we show with that single dot? And as our scale of inquiry goes up, as we become more focused on a smaller area of the world, the more detail we can show, that increases. So you're asked questions about the political, cultural, economic, and then rural, urban elements. In the world light map, you definitely get an idea of rural versus urban. The places that are urban, they show up with a lot of light. Places with rural, they show up with almost no light at all. You can also get an idea of economics from this. You can assume that there's going to be more industrial type economic activities in places where there's lights. Light, after all, has to be produced in some way, and still the number one way to produce light around the world is the use of fossil fuels, which means factories, and you have to produce electricity near where people live. All right, culturally, we can imagine that the places that are more lit up globally are the places that are more plugged into global culture. They're also the places that are less likely to be living a, quote, solar lifestyle. Solar lifestyle means you get up when the sun comes up, you go to bed when the sun goes down. And that's a whole different cultural change when you can undo that and you have things first like gas lights in history and then later on things like electric lighting. Politically, we assume that the places that are light sources are more likely to be the hubs of political activity, and we can see which areas of the world are perhaps politically more dominant as they have more light sources. All right, when we look at the United States, again, rural versus urban, we get an understanding that every part of the United States has rural and has urban, but we also get an understanding that some places have more urban than others. A good example of inequality that we can see in more detail. We can see as we look at the entire U.S. that every state has some light sources, but those light sources become more spread out as there is more of a disparity between urban and rural. And that's something we couldn't necessarily see on the world map. We could tell that was the trend, but we get more of an understanding that all 50 U.S. states have urban and all 50 have rural. The difference is how much of each. Economically, those places that are dark in the United States are places that are economically behind. Just like we saw with the entire world, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, were dark. Parts of the South in the United States, rural portions of Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, those are also dark. Okay, and then culturally, we get a really good understanding of which parts of the United States are driving both the political and cultural elements of the US, and which ones are likely to be economic and cultural and political backwaters. And then we have the North Dakota map. Why North Dakota? Because North Dakota is a state that most students assume is rural and backward and remote, and yet we see that there are light sources and there are areas of darkness. North Dakota is a state that appeared mostly dark on our previous maps, and now all of a sudden we see it does have light sources. So we're able to see that rural versus urban in more detail. We are able to see that some parts of North Dakota have economic hub potentials, have culturally driving potentials. Take, for example, in North Dakota, your larger cities are more likely to be places where you find culturally your large corporations, your entertainment areas, your colleges and universities. Yes, they still exist even in a predominantly rural state like North Dakota. Politically, again, most of the political activity in North Dakota is going to be happening in those little pinprick light source areas. So it's still going on, but just more spread out. One last thing that you can see politically on all of these maps is you can see in some places where the borders of some states end and the border of the next state begins. Take, for example, when you look at the world map, you look at the Korean Peninsula. You can see a big separation between North and South Korea. Okay, so I hope this helped you get your feet wet a little bit with your political geography understanding. Don't forget that this week you have bell ringers you can do. You have 3 for 3s to help you review. In just a minute, as soon as I finish making this video, I'll be posting your PDF of review questions, and we'll be opening up that AP Classroom assignment. I'll also be working throughout the week to get you feedback on the previous FRQs. All right, have a good day and stay safe.